Welcome to the Fight Monsters podcast. Today we're talking to real people fighting real monsters.
Fight monsters, fight monsters. You're listening to the Fight Monsters podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fight Monster Show. I'm your host, Steven Norberg, and today we have a special guest, a friend of mine, Austin. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Tell me a little bit about a monster that you've been fighting.
All right. Well, a monster that I've been fighting. I live every day with the consequences of what's called a severe traumatic brain injury, or TBI, that I read about, research about, and work on. So it's kind of my whole life.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of kind of the moment this happened, or
Sure.
Yeah, love to hear more about that.
Let me take you all the way back to 2003. War in Iraq was happening. I was a Middle East studies person, so I was over in Egypt pursuing a Fulbright. And while I was crossing the street, standing in the middle of the road waiting for the cars to go by before I could keep walking, a tourist bus didn't see me, and the mirror side of the bus came and clocked me right smack head, knocked me into a month-and-a-half coma.
Wow.
So what I've been told is that my friend who was with me at the time pulled my bloody body out of the street, took off his shirt, wrapped it around my head, and then the police came, the tourist police came, and they stuffed me into the back of a taxi with my legs sticking out the side, and a cop was riding on the edge of the door to make sure the door wouldn't slam shut on my feet when they turned a corner, and they took me to the tourist hospital. Then they took me to a hospital in Cairo. My parents came over, saw that I wasn't getting better, and they were confused as to why. So then they medevaced me from Cairo back to Seattle, where I'm from. They did an MRI on me, and they found that I actually had really severe brain damage, and that explains why I was having certain problems and why I wasn't fully conscious. Woke up about a month later in the hospital, and of course it was much more gradual than that. It wasn't like the movies where you just wake up. But anyways, my memory kicks in, and I can remember being awake and confused where I was. Not sure what these things coming out of my arms were. I remember pulling the IV out of my arm several times and having the nurses come and put it back in. And I had my 23rd birthday in the hospital. Like the next day, after I apparently got out of bed in the middle of the night, got out of the restraints that they put on me to keep me from doing that, made my way into the bathroom, but because of my brain injury, I had severe balance problems, and so I couldn't stand up, and I fell over and knocked myself out again by falling on the toilet.
Wow.
That was the day before my birthday. I've got pictures of my birthday that year where I have a big lump right there on my head where I smacked the toilet. Several years later, now 17, almost 18, my life's had a lot of twists and turns. It's been quite a struggle, especially dealing with people who don't, it's not so much that they don't get it, it's that they're not willing to listen about something that contradicts one of the most basic things they assume about human life. And here I just finished my PhD with a study on brain injury that was sponsored by the NSF, called The Social Life of TBI, the embodied and constructed meaning of moderate to severe traumatic brain injury in the United States, at the University of Arizona's award-winning medical anthropology program. And now I'm working as a postdoc for the medical college here, working with disabled populations, developmentally disabled people, and children with autism.
So, yeah, that's a pretty huge milestone that we just caught you at the end of here for our podcast. Lucky us. That's an extraordinary journey. I'd love to hear more about all those things, but I think one question I want to ask right off the bat is, to hear a little bit about the stigma that is TBI and what you've learned about that and experienced about that.
So the stigma of TBI is hard to pin down. It's ephemeral, right?
Mm.
It changes. It depends on the person who is stigmatizing, because TBI is one of the most common injuries that people have in the US. It's not as common as broken arm, but it's nearly as common because it's essentially like a broken head. And I don't mean broken head in the sense of mental illness, and that's exactly what people think when I say that. I mean, like, you get hit in the head or you hit your head and it damages the brain inside the skull. It's as simple as that. It can be as remarkable as somebody like Gabby Giffords, who right here in Tucson, where I am, got shot in the head 10 years ago. Or it can be as, minimal, or at least people say it's minimal, as a football player getting knocked on the field and suffering a concussion. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But for some reason, most people don't get that. And then when they hear that and they see the fact that I'm mostly, not always, but mostly coherent, and the sounds don't sound bad that are coming out of my mouth. If you were a speech pathologist, you could hear it immediately with my speech. You say, hey, that's an aphasic speech pattern. That guy must have had some sort of brain damage. Uh-oh, here's my cat.
A special guest I didn't even realize we were going to have.
There you go.
Awesome.
So, oh shoot, where was I? Yeah, so people don't understand what it means, and they hear me acting fine, and so they automatically say that I'm, oh, what's the word? Like trying to play up essentially the monsters in my past, to get some sort of unearned privilege from other people. The common medical term for it is malingering. Basically, I'm playing up my problems to elicit sympathy or some sort of special permission or something from people.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that when I tell people about my injury, it's to explain something that I do that might not make sense. And so I'm doing it for a very specific reason, but they assume that I'm doing it because I'm trying to get some sort of favor from them, and they treat me badly because of something that I didn't do, on top of which they don't actually do what I was trying to get from them when I told them in the first place. So it magnifies the damage. And so I do research on this as in the US as a very, very common thing. It is literally, I'm not kidding when I say this, is the most common cause of death and disability for people under the age of 65 in the US. And it's one of the most common causes of death and disability for everyone in the US. But nobody really quite gets that. And so if I ever try and explain it as a way of explaining what I do or something strange about me, like say I forget your name 2 minutes after talking to you, Steven, I might forget your name in the middle of this interview. It'll happen. I mean, I'm not saying it will happen, but it might happen. And I can't control when it happens. And so they take that as me asking for some sort of special privilege or permission that I don't deserve. And let's just say that after a while, that really starts to drain on you. And I am so much more fortunate than many of the other people in the same situation as I am, because for them, it's can be, and I'm not kidding about this, a life or death matter. Affects housing, livelihood, employment if they're lucky enough to be able to work, personal connections. And I'm not kidding when I say it can be a life or death matter. I actually know several people for whom it was a very serious life or death matter. Fortunately, very fortunately, they're still alive today. But that's not to say that they wouldn't have been if someone didn't step in at the right minute to help them out.
Right. I'm curious if you've heard certain things over and over again, like maybe have people ever told you just to get over it, or asked certain kinds of questions that you just have gotten sick of hearing at this point because Do you wish people truly understood instead of
Yeah.
pushing you? Yeah, I'm curious if you can talk about that for a minute.
Yes. I hear those almost all the time, including from my own parents at times.
Hmm.
You should just get over it or learn to live with it. I mean, I do learn to live with it. I live with it every day,
Yeah.
but that doesn't make it go away. Um, so being told that I should get over it, that, oh, this is one of the worst ones that I heard right after my interview with a good friend of mine. Oh, everyone has problems. So, sort of similar to, everyone does have problems, right? But to insist that everyone has problems is a way of completely disregarding what it's like to live with having your entire existence changed like that is disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if you can tell us, kind of from your experience, have there been maybe some people that actually did say some helpful or encouraging things, contrasted with people who, for sure, did not say helpful things that were, really a barrier for you?
Well, I can tell you in my experience what was the single most, I don't want to necessarily say useful thing that I've heard, but just the thing that felt the best, that made me feel the best, which was, and I'm not being facetious or cheesy when I say this, it was, I hear you.
Hmm.
Because that is actually a fairly rare experience. When I talk to people about what it's like to have a brain injury, a serious brain injury, any brain injury is serious, but
Yeah.
the number of times when I say that and it's like talking to an empty room, I could, it's, I would say, because I do explain it several times a week, it used to be several times a day. Um, I would say 9.5 times out of 10, I wouldn't be heard. People wouldn't understand. They wouldn't try and understand. So when somebody tells me that, yes, they hear me, they've heard what I've said, and they give me some sign that, in fact, they did hear it, that is like a ray of sunshine shining through a cloudy, stormy day.
So that makes a pretty big difference. The rare times that
Yes.
somebody, yeah, says that. Wow. So I'd love to go back a little bit and talk about maybe earlier on in the process. I know that you and I met in Washington D.C. I think a few years
Mhm.
after this had happened, and
Yes.
uh, and I know at the time that you were kind of navigating what it was like with this new thing in your life, this new monster, and you had already learned quite a bit, but there were still things that just really affected your life on a daily basis that you were figuring out. And I'd love if you could share a little bit more about that and kind of some of the surprising things that you had to relearn from scratch and just the
Yep.
the ways that you navigated that.
Sure. Okay, so when I met you, that was about a little over 12 years post injury.
Okay.
Maybe it
Yeah.
was more. But and the fact that I had worked several times in small jobs over the years since then, like one extra fun job when I was essentially an office hand at a friend of my parents' architecture firm, and I had no talents, and they would have me wipe down tables, take coffee to the meeting room, not because they needed anyone to do it, because they were just giving me a job, and it was a bit demeaning. But anyways, when I met you, I was in my first major job, and I was actually working for the Foreign Service. Uh, and one thing I learned at that time, I had just come back from the Peace Corps. I thought I could do the whole government thing, and I was all about international work. I don't take orders. Uh, and it plays into the whole TBI thing too, but also I think it's just my personality. I don't want somebody else telling me what to do when I don't agree with what they're telling me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So while I was living at your house, I quit my job. And that was the first time where I really felt unemployed. I'd been unemployed many, many, many times and then gotten jobs and then lost jobs post injury. But that was the first time that I had a major career that was going and all of a sudden just stopped, hit a roadblock, and I gave up. And that was before I started grad school, started on this academic career that I'm on now. And I really had to learn how to give myself a break. I don't think I need to say, but I will, how incredibly embarrassing and disheartening for me that was. Like, here I was, had a job in the Foreign Service. I was making more money than I ever made before. I mean, I still was not making a lot of money, but entry level job which required a master's in the Foreign Service was far more money than I ever made before. And so I felt incredible to have it, but I just couldn't do it. I wasn't the right person for the job, and I wasn't good at my job. I was terrible at it. For a large part because I didn't know how to explain about my TBI, to ask for the services and the accommodations that I needed in order to succeed, but mainly just because I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to work for the government. I didn't want to work for the Foreign Service. And so while I was at your house, there were 8 of us living there. It was lots of very high-powered young people. And here I was, a complete failure at my job, quit. I mean, it wasn't, at least they didn't fire me. They let me quit on my own, although I'm pretty sure they would have fired me within a few months. But, and I had no prospects for future employment. I was just, job searching. But really what I was trying to do was trying to find my way around life, to wrap my brain around this brain injury thing is not going away. Doesn't matter how much I've done or what kind of job I get, it's still going to be there, and I have to learn to deal with it. I remember spending a lot of time walking around the city of DC, just walking. I went to a bunch of cafes. I had a little project that I called Every Day Another Cafe, where I'd walk to different coffee shops to see what the coffee was like. And that was just to try and give myself some purpose, some meaning in life that I was trying to build up from the ashes again, which I had done several times since my brain injury. But this time it was like I'd really made it and then just totally fell flat on my face. Wow. And I didn't explain it to anyone in the house at the time because I didn't really understand it myself. But it was a long, slow sap on my strength and my self-esteem that, frankly, living in the house was the only thing that was good in my life at that time, because it felt like there were people who were, you were all much more successful and accomplished than I was, but there were people who were willing just to accept me and not push me, which was, I was pushing myself every day. I was kicking myself more every day. But the people in the house, I had to get used to that, where it was, you were not going to, punish isn't the right word, but you weren't going to demean me for my own failure. And I had to get used to letting you all not demean me, because I was expecting, because post TBI, this was my experience, to have everyone around me misunderstand and effectively trash me because of that. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about some of the hardest things that you had to relearn, because I think that was interesting. We've talked about that a bit before. There were different things that you really had to relearn from scratch that took you quite a while to get down, and then it seemed like you did really well with it. But I'm curious if you can walk us through that for a minute.
So one of the things that's ongoing for me, and really it's an everyday struggle to relearn how to do this, is to give myself some slack it's one of those things that in the U.S. we are not trained to do very well.
Yeah, that's right.
Part of that's the Protestant work ethic that we're all raised with. Max Weber's theory on, we all have this idea of self-worth as being shown by how successful we are at working. So part of it's that, but then part of it is just like I had all these dreams that I was achieving, and suddenly I'm not able to live up to them. And so I'm an academic, and I'm an academic with a cognitive disability. That is not easy to deal with. There are things like one of the most basic things that academics do is read. I should say, we read. Guess what? I have problems reading.
Wow.
And mainly it has to do with memory. I can finish a sentence, and I have no idea what the first half of the sentence was. And when it comes to academic stuff, it takes quite a bit to get that. So I really had to struggle with relearning how to cut myself some slack, because I'm an academic. I should be able to read well. And the fact that I struggle with reading, it's not like I struggle with reading like you don't recognize words. I recognize them just fine. I have a very good vocabulary.
Yeah.
But because of memory issues and attention, if I'm emotionally distressed at all, I will forget what I'm reading while I'm reading it. And so giving myself some slack helps me tone down the stress level to the point where I can read, not as well as I would like, certainly not as well as all of my peers, almost all of my peers, but at least allowed me to get a sense of the thing that I'm reading to carry on with. Another thing that is really hard, and I think I've done this pretty well, but I struggle with it still, is learning to trust people. That sounds almost like I'm being facetious, but it's not. As a TBI survivor, I have a lot of little things that I need help with every day in all of my interactions. I'm talking to you. There are times where I will forget what I started saying, and I'll have to ask you to remind me. I need to learn how to trust people easily, and to trust that they're not going to use that against me, because that's something that I learned by hard experience to defend against, was that people would use my own faults against me. The fact that I would have these problems with reading, for example, and if I tell people that, they might use it against me.
Right.
I had to learn how to trust people not to do that. And I had a lot of experiences soon after my injury, within the first 5 years or so, where people used that against me all the time. Even if they didn't necessarily mean it to be offensive or to be used against me, they effectively did. And so that built up a lot of distrust in me, and those people were the ones that I needed to rely on in order to do the things that I wanted to do. But I wasn't able to trust them anymore. Just part of it was paranoia, part of it was experience, part of it was complicated. But effectively, I didn't trust them, and I had to relearn how to do that. And like I said, it's an everyday struggle that I'm still trying to relearn how to trust people. And now I'm not totally sure of others, although when you first asked me, I could think of a whole bunch. Could you possibly help me out by giving me an idea of what we might have talked about before that I'm forgetting?
Yeah, one of the really interesting things you told me before was something as simple as making like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, just navigating the order, and then the walking and the speaking. I know you put a lot of work into that and made a lot of progress with those things too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, something basically like that. Okay, so one of the most significant things that neuropsychological evaluations discovered, and those are not like emotional evaluations. Neuropsychological evaluations are all about like critical thinking skills and stuff like that. One of the big deficits I had was in what's called executive functioning.
Hmm.
That's come back quite strongly since my injury, but it took years. And what that is sort of like, I don't want to say it's the logical part of your brain, but it's the part of your brain that arranges tasks before you do them, right? So in order to execute something, you have to do this and this and this and this. So take, for example, the simple act of walking. Seems stupidly obvious to most of us. And frankly, it's instinctual, I think, for a lot of people. But for me, it wasn't. And one of the things I had to relearn how to do after my injury was learn how to walk again. And yes, it was, one of the things where you're walking in the poles and you're holding yourself up and you're working with a physical therapist to try and figure out how to move your legs again. But one of the things that most people don't get is that when you walk, just a simple act of walking takes an immense amount of executive functioning that happens instantaneously in your brain. You have to decide which muscles to move when. And it's not just a few muscles. It's not like one, like two. It's lots of different muscles in your legs and your feet and your back. And it's very much a coordinated process that your body goes through in order to walk. But because most of us learn it and we do so fairly instinctually, we just think of it as like I just walk. It's like one process. Well, guess what? It's not. It's actually several different things. And there's a part of your brain that actually organizes all those different things into a comprehensive process so that you can walk without thinking about it. Well, guess what? I had to think about it. And even today, I still need to think about it when I do it. I have to know, it's not just put one foot in front of the other. In order to put that front of the other, what do you have to do? You have to do all these things with your various muscles to get to move. Then you have to do all these other things with other muscles so that you can balance on other foot while you're moving the one foot in front of you. And you have to be keeping aware of your surroundings so that you don't bump into something or fall or something like that. Yeah. In other words, it's a very complex, intricate process that we're humans, our brains are phenomenal, and we just do it. But for me, that doesn't happen instantaneously and instinctually anymore. So I had to, actually I still have to at times, really think about what I'm going to do. I will give you a key example of this, which is not related to execution, but it's related in a way.
Yeah.
I was just running today. I like to run.
Nice.
When I'm tired, which is almost always, I have problems with double vision. What that means is it has nothing to do with my eyes, at least not directly. It has to do with the part of the brain that manages vision. So if you think about it, we all see double. We all have two eyes, and it's our brain that's taking those two sets of vision and merging together to get things like depth. So, as somebody with brain damage, one of the things that I have problems with is double vision. I always have. So it's like cross your eyes. That's what the world always looks like to me.
Wow.
But I've learned almost unconsciously to not worry about it. And it's not bad double vision. Over on the sides, it's very bad. So if I'm looking at either fingers, I always see double no matter what. They're sort of like here's one finger and it goes wah. But when I'm tired, I can't do that even if I'm looking straight forward. Even if I'm looking in the distance, I see like this all the time.
Wow.
I don't know if you can see my eyes are very crossed. So when I was jogging today, I was seeing two sets of everything, and they were not just two sets of everything, but they were going like this because I was jogging.
You're bouncing around.
So I had to consciously manage what I was going to do so that I wouldn't step off the sidewalk. I wouldn't run into a car because I see two cars coming up. There's only one, and I know that's only one, but I see two. So I had to learn to manage how to deal with that and yet keep running because, I could stop running. and just walk. And then actually I might regain enough strength that I could resolve it to singular again. Like I said, my brain has figured out around this double vision. It still sees double vision. It can resolve the difference. I don't know how to explain it exactly. But that would require me to start walking and get less exercise. And finishing out my dissertation, I put on literally 20 pounds.
Wow.
I'm working that off right now. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep running, and I had to figure out a way to keep running, even though I was seeing double. I was running on the side of the road, and there was always two cars coming right at me. I had gone on the right side one. I might risk the right side one. I might risk walking or running, jogging too far into the road. But if I was on the left side one exclusively, I might risk falling off into the ditch.
Wow.
So I had to constantly think about that while I was running. Again, that's a lot better than it was. A lot better than it was, but it's still there. And it comes, rushing to the fore as soon as I get tired or stressed or emotional or hungry or any number of things that knock my system out of whack.
Yeah.
And it's those that I deal with every single day that I try to explain to people, and they don't understand, or they don't want to because maybe they feel like it's giving me too much credit that I deal with this stuff every day that they don't. They don't feel like it's like you're a human being. You see things, you move places, you don't think about it. Well, guess what? Some of us have to.
Yeah.
So,
do you ever feel like you're able to just sit back and celebrate the fact that many of the things that you do are harder for you than the average person, and the things that you've overcome and accomplished? Or do you feel like it's hard for you to go there and actually give yourself permission to feel good about that?
That's an interesting question. I was actually just thinking about that today in relation to this double vision thing when I got back from my run. I was thinking, because I'm dealing with friends of mine who are still in the program, who are definitely struggling because it's hard to do human research at a time when we're not allowed to do human research because of the pandemic.
Sure, yeah.
And they're definitely struggling with that. And one of the things that TBI survivors like to tell other people, because of the isolation and the things being difficult and not the way they usually are, is now you know what it feels like to be me every day. And I haven't said that to people very much because they actually got mad when I first said it.
Yeah.
Last year. But one of the things I was thinking of is I'm able to do this really well, and people are really struggling with things that are, not as fundamental as this, but still it's something gets thrown out of whack and they're not able to deal with it. I am, because I've had this long experience of dealing with these fundamental things like vision and motion that are difficult and require more effort. And that's good. And then I stop myself, because I often do this, because it just feels wrong somehow, like the things that people are dealing with because of COVID are awful. They are literal life and death matters. And so I don't want to put myself in front of them and sort of feel, it feels dirty in a way to feel good about that. Even though I fully know that these issues for TBI survivors literally are life and death matters. Just because they're not necessarily for me doesn't mean that they aren't for a lot of people who are dealing with this. So it's one of those things where I always want to sit back and feel good about the fact that, hey, I got a PhD when I had a cognitive disability. But then I'm like, yeah, but there are lots of people who have had all sorts of other difficulties in life that are also getting PhDs. And so I don't want to sit back and give myself too much credit, because I know a lot of people are dealing with their own monsters that might not be the same as mine, but they're still monsters.
Right. That resonates with me a lot. I think one of the really challenging things to do is to simultaneously have empathy for other people, because there are always people who have it worse than us.
Yeah.
But then to also just acknowledge and celebrate the things that we've endured and that we've overcome, and that we're still here, and that we're still moving forward and going a step at a time. And I think that finding that balance is difficult. And I am really bad, I think, at giving myself a break, at allowing myself to feel good about things that I've done. There's always that one other thing that I want to figure out or fix, or that I'm not good at, that drives me crazy. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. Yeah.
That was literally something that just happened a few hours ago. So
Yeah.
I thought I would share it.
Yeah, that's great. Um, and thinking about monsters, I think two of the very common side effects that we often experience, or at least in my case, is bitterness and some kind of fear or anxiety. I think for me, it's been really hard not to get bitter about some of the frustrating and hard things, and then also sometimes just these enduring feelings of anxiety, whether it's going to happen again, or just kind of just a higher level of pressure and stress because of extended periods of struggle. I'm curious if you've experienced the bitterness and the anxiety in tangible ways, or if you have thoughts about those things.
Oh boy, have I. Yes, the bitterness and anger is a very common emotional response to a moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. And I think all of my informants from my PhD research went through some, and it never really goes away.
Yeah.
You know, I often I blame lots of people for what happened to me. And you know, so there's little annoying voice in my head that says, "Oh, you should blame yourself because you were crossing the street and you had control over that." Yes and no. That is the way people cross the street in Egypt, and I had to do it, otherwise it would never get across. But at the same time, blaming anyone is not going to help me. And I'm the one who's in this situation right now. And if I get stuck, the psychological language for it is perseverating on the blame game or the anger. Basically, all these people that set me off in the day by not understanding or not listening.
Yeah.
If I get stuck perseverating, that's going to make it worse, a lot worse. And so there are times, and it's a daily struggle, where I have to just sit down and say, okay, calm down. There are actually plenty of good things in your life. I'm a musician. I have problems using my left hand. It doesn't work very well. I have this condition called ataxia, which affects muscular coordination, and on my left side especially. So, but I've been able to work really hard. I actually bruised my wrist several times, pounding the ground in frustration.
Wow.
Because I was not able to use my hand the way I wanted to. But the fact that I'm able to do that again, that thinking that yes, I can do that, allows me to get over. I mean, it's not always the case, but most of the time allows me, thinking of those good things that I would do, allows me to get over my perseverating and my anger and my bitterness. Now I forgot the second part of your question. I know that was the first.
Yeah, it was about anxiety, kind of the fear and the anxiety, if that's something that you've learned to navigate.
And anxiety is something that I deal with on a daily basis. People who have had one TBI, even just a concussion, but severe TBIs especially, are at much higher risk for having another.
Wow.
Much higher. I've hit my head several times since that I'm pretty sure were small traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah.
We are at extremely high risk. It's thought. It's not totally known, but it's thought for CTE. If everybody has watched the movie Concussion, that's CTE. Not the same thing as TBI, but it's a consequence of TBI.
Okay.
TBI survivors had, and I did this when I was back on the Hill in DC for TBI Awareness Day last year, like a week before lockdown. That traumatic brain injury survivors on the whole have a 9-year lower life expectancy than the rest of the populace.
Wow.
And that's me. So I am pretty scared of that, but I used to think this more, especially in my 20s, after my injury, that lightning doesn't hit the same place twice, which is not true, but it doesn't matter. That's
Yeah.
it's a common thing that I like to tell myself. And so there were definitely times where I was stupidly reckless because of that. I'm less so now that I'm older, but I still have this sense that I'm probably going to die significantly earlier than my peers, and it's probably going to be TBI related.
Wow.
I fall down, I break things all the time. There are times when I'm actually a very good driver because I'm pretty cautious, but I still had my moments, as I think most people have, but because of my cognitive impairments, I'm much less able to recover from those moments like that than other people are. So I'm definitely aware of it. And there are times when it gets not paralyzingly frightening, but where it just creates this deep seated anxiety in me that hampers my effectiveness. And I have to tell myself to stop thinking that. And of course, being a scholar, being very intellectual and logical, I want to say, yeah, well, logically, this, which means I do have this much higher risk. And we know that empirically as well. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But you know what, Austin? That's only going to make it worse. So stop thinking about that. And that took me a long time to be able to say,
Wow.
as in like 10, 12 years to be able to help myself get over those moments of crippling. It's anxiety. And it's definitely true that I have a lot of symptoms of post-traumatic stress. But of course, I don't actually have PTSD. I've been diagnosed with various anxiety disorders and depressive disorders because of TBI before, and that have never risen to the level of PTSD. But because of the slow burning stresses that are I've known much more in my life than in other people's, but much more in my life than there ever were pre-injury. I definitely have this sort of underwriting anxiety disorder. I don't want to call it disorder, but just I have a lot of anxiety in me that I have to constantly try and tell myself, you know what, there may be logical reasons for your anxiety, but it's not helping anything. So stop.
Yeah.
And I will let you know when I find a good way to do that, because I haven't yet, but I'm trying.
Yeah. Please do. I get that. I'm curious if you can share a time maybe that there is something that you worked really hard that you're just really proud that you overcame, that maybe another person would not recognize that you spent a long time working on it and it seemed like a mild achievement, but something that you felt really proud at overcoming that just made you feel really good.
Yeah, I got to think about that for a sec.
Mm.
I mean, obviously, the thing that I'm the most proud of in my life right now is getting a PhD. And that's a
Yeah.
big achievement for a lot of people I know.
Yeah. Right.
But I'm not judging myself against everyone else. And I honestly think that lots of people could get PhDs. They just don't choose to because it's an awful process. It's a very, very painful thing to go through.
Yeah.
But judging myself against all of my peers, I don't want to get into the trope of saying, just existing is good for me because I'm a TBI survivor and nobody else has to deal with this, because that's not exactly true.
Mm.
I should celebrate myself for the things that I've done that are also a big deal. And I should celebrate them more so because I did this as a TBI survivor.
Yeah.
And so against all of my peers who when you get to a certain stage in a PhD program, it's pretty much inevitable that you're going to receive your dissertation, your degree.
Yeah.
The fact that I did that and had to deal with this, I do sit there and tell myself, you should be proud of this. You did it. There are lots of things that made me sort of go, and what sort of fear that my advisors just gave it to me as a courtesy because I was a TBI survivor.
Wow.
But I also pretty sure that's not true.
Yeah.
So that's just a thing that I sit there and say, yeah, feel good about that. Like I did that. I know that for a lot of people in my position, advanced graduate students, it's pretty close to an inevitability. But the fact that I did it, I feel pretty darn happy about.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of years and a lot of work and a lot of struggle.
Yeah.
That you had many chances to quit, and I know that there were a lot of extra bumps and some hard ways along the way that you endured. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really, really powerful. In talking about your story, I wonder if you can share anything that you've turned to or just gotten good at, just as like a therapeutic way to de-stress or to get a break when things are frustrating or hard or you feel bitter or anxious.
Yeah.
Are there anything that you found that's been really positive and fruitful for you in that regard?
Oh, music, hands down.
Music, yeah.
I was always a musician before my injury. I was a pretty good musician. I had played several instruments. I'd done some composing and recording of myself, and so I was good. I was relatively good for a kid at rock and at classical piano.
Yeah.
My left hand doesn't work very well now, so playing a guitar is almost impossible because that is so left hand dependent.
Yeah.
For me who's right-handed, my left hand, I have to strum with this hand and play with this hand. The piano is something that I struggled for many, 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 many years after my injury, and essentially had to teach myself from the ground up. And I've actually had several teachers refuse to teach me anymore because it was too frustrating for them to work with me.
Oh, wow.
Because they would tell me to do things and I couldn't do them.
Yeah.
They would say, no, you're not doing it. Do it again. I would try. And they'd say, no, but you're not doing it. You need to do this. And then try again. And I couldn't do it. And I would say, you're not trying. I say, no, I am trying. My left hand will not do that. I am trying to tell it to do the thing that you're telling me to tell it to do. And it's not doing that. And that's not to say that my left hand does the things that I tell it to do now, but it does it much better than it used to. Going back to the neuropsychological evaluations, it actually measured fine motor skills. And my right hand, after my injury, was at about, I think it was 40-something%. And my left hand was less than 1 percentile, as in,
wow,
not over 99% of the people in the U.S. had more control of their left hand than I did.
Wow, that's nuts.
And now I'm able to play relatively high level stuff again. Not necessarily well, but well enough for me.
That's right.
And that is the one thing that I've done ever since my injury. I have a piano at my parents' house that I played and probably hurt because I would get upset and frustrated and slam my hands down on the keys several times because my hand wouldn't do it. In the first years when I was playing it, my left hand wouldn't even stay on the keys when I would play it. If I would try to move a finger, my whole hand would just fall off.
Wow. Yeah.
But then when I was in DC, actually, once I had a job that gave me some money, I bought a piano that I had at your house for, it was around $1,000 then. So that was more money than I had ever spent on anything. It was like 10 times more money than I ever spent on anything. And I still have that piano.
Do you?
And I still play it multiple times every single day because that is the one thing that gives me a sense of not just pleasure, but purpose. A lot of people like to talk about music like it's some sort of meaning, like a story. Like you play music and you have this story going in your head. And for some pieces that's true. But for a lot of them it's not. The kind of meaning in music can't be expressed in words. It can only be expressed in music. So it's like communicating instead of with words, with music. And you attach all sorts of emotional senses to music, but you're not putting literal meaning into it. You're putting pre-literal meaning into it. And so by playing that, even though I'm not playing it for other people, I'm just playing for myself, but by doing that, that allows me to work through all of this stuff. And it challenges my neurological faculties, to be able to control my left hand, but then also to think through the music and the different chord changes and the dynamic changes and everything like that. That has, I think, been the primary driver of my continued improvement from my TBI. And I don't think it's restoration of neural pathways that had existed before my injury. I think it's just creating new ones. It's in some very real cases, it's growing new brain cells, because we know that the brain does that now.
Yeah.
And it does that in response to neurological stimulation. Well, music is neurological stimulation. So that, more than anything else, has kept me going through everything, because it's emotional. It gives me this ability to put meaning in something, to express meaning, and not to express meaning that has some sort of trite, literal sense. Like, this feels like sadness, and this feels like it's pre-lingual. It's communicating by a way that is not language, and that really has kept me going through really the extreme difficulty and duress and constant mental and emotional assault that was grad school, especially as a person with a cognitive disability in grad school.
Yeah. I'm glad that you said that. I've often found music to be a really really comfortable place to go when I just need to express myself in a way that I can't with words or other actions. Somehow it's like turning on the tap to letting out something inside that I had no other outlet for, and it's neat. Yeah, neat to hear. I don't know if I told you this, but I got a piano after you moved out, and I started to learn to play the piano. I was pretty sure that was a few years after you left, because I play the guitar and some other instruments, but I added a keyboard to my repertoire and was not very good, and I'm still not very good. But the thing I liked about the piano the most was
better.
Yeah, exactly. It allowed for me to play without thinking and to express myself in a way that was just very needed and different. So. Very cool. So I'd love to end with kind of a final question for you, and that's just is there something that you wish you could go back and tell yourself earlier in the process?
Yeah.
The long road. How would you kind of encourage or coach yourself at this point?
Not just me, but everyone.
Yeah.
And this is trite, and I apologize, but that doesn't mean it's not only true, but the most true of anything that I have said. Other people are the ones who make the difference. As I said in my informants, they are the difference among all of our lives, makes the difference between our lives. Those of us who have other people around us who are there to help out, to keep us up when we're down, to give us, again, trite but still meaning, the safe space to be what we need to be in order to not overcome, I hate that word, but in order to live with what we live with as a result of our injuries, is everything. There's a line from Jodie Foster's Contact, which I cite in my dissertation. And it's one of my favorite lines of all time.
Nice.
And I first heard this when I was 16, going to like a late night showing in East Bremerton, which was like a half an hour's drive away from my house. I grew up in a small town outside of Seattle. And so we went to this larger town to go see a theater, me and my brother, when I was 16, going on 17. And it was Contact with Jodie Foster. And I was so moved by that movie. Still one of my favorite movies to this day. But she said at the very end, when not the prosecutor, but the guy who was leading the probe to question whether or not she really went through all the things that she went through, accused her of something, and she finally said, she just threw in the towel, said, I can't speak anymore, but, and this is the quote, I had an experience. This shows us that not one of us is alone. And I don't remember the exact line. I'm afraid that's brain injury. I can't remember the exact specifics of things, even though I remember the meaning behind them. But anyways, that line was basically saying the thing that's important is that we all have each other. Even if we don't want each other, we make each other up. And this is the academic, we constitute each other. There's part of you in me in you, and everyone going back to the origins of humanity. In other words, whether we want to or not, we're part of something that is much bigger than ours, and that can help or hurt us, and does help or hurt us. And I wish I had thought about that. It wasn't just me. And of course, that's for good and for bad. Other people are also the biggest problems in my life with TBI. But they are the only things that made that life with TBI worth it. And just like Jodie Foster, I wish I could share that with people, that we are not, that not one of us is alone. Again, for good and ill, but there is no good that doesn't come from other people. And so trust that, even though they might and they will cause you pain and they will constitute you part of your monsters, they're also the only things that you can defeat those monsters with. And I wish I had heard that from somebody other than Jodie Foster, of course, when I had first had this injury back in 2003, because now that I'm years past it, and I'm 40 years old, I can't believe how old I am. 40 years old, and I've done a whole lot since my injury. I wish that I had learned to just sit back on my laurels and trust other people to help me through it more, because they're the only ones that ever actually did help me through it.
That is profound, and I can't agree with you enough. Thank you very much for saying that and sharing a lot of your life and your story with us. I think there's a lot of power in just hearing you talk about what you've experienced and learned and how you've grown and what you've overcome. So thank you so much for that, Austin. And
thank you very much for talking with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to conclude, I know I've asked you a bunch of deep, probing personal questions. So if there's anything that you'd like to ask me, I'm happy to answer anything you want if you have any questions for me.
I would like to hear two things from you, if I could.
All right.
First, we lived here in this group house in DC for well over a year. I don't remember how long it was, like a year and 2/3, a year and almost 2 years, basically.
Yeah.
How much could you see in my life interactions, whatever, that was, you said, oh, this is definitely TBI, and how much of it was just sort of, there's this weird guy with us who quit his job and is now unemployed and then applied to grad school for some bizarre reason?
Well, I definitely had, I think, an affinity for you and for getting to know you, because there are certainly some things in your life that made me feel like some of my being eccentric wasn't so out there. So I think one of the things I noticed, and then we talked about it a bit, was social awkwardness. And I think I noticed that because I am a self-proclaimed very socially awkward person, having been homeschooled for 11 years and fully embraced my social awkwardness. So I know we talked about about that a bit, but just kind of debriefing sometimes with each other about social activities, and then talking about things that happened and that felt a little bit off. I definitely kind of felt like I connected to you in that way, and some of the things that you shared resonated with me, and I think I learned from you about that. And then I think music stood out as I think you are a great model and example of how you turn to music as a way to empower yourself and to find meaning and purpose and to just take care of yourself. And that stood out because I often struggled to give myself permission to do things that I needed or wanted. I think that's something I've always been bad at. And so seeing you have such joy and passion for playing the piano, and we talked about different kinds of music we like, and I picked up some new favorite bands because of you. So that was certainly something that stuck out to me also about living together. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And then number two.
Number two. All
Um,
right.
we've talked about this before, but I don't remember the answer very well, if at all. I want to know, aside from the obvious monster in the room, if there was a monster that you have dealt with and you have found your way past in order to get here. And again, I don't mean the obvious monster in the room,
Yeah.
obvious literal monster. I mean something else.
That's a great question, and I think that often there are a lot of monsters in our lives that it's rare or probably impossible just to have one. But sometimes there are big ones, and sometimes there are packs of screaming little ugly monsters chasing us around. Um, for me, the thing that comes to mind, I think, is mostly a monster of my own doing, of something that I've had just kind of weighing me down for a long time. I think I have a strength and a weakness of wanting to be really independent and different and being a contrarian. And, since college, I've been an entrepreneur. I've challenged a bunch of things. I've started some businesses and just try to do a bunch of things differently. And to some degree, that's been healthy and good, and I like that about myself. But I think the ugly side of that, the monster in there, is this need to prove to myself and to other people. And I often don't think other people even care that much, but I feel like I have to prove to them that my independence or my unique way of doing things is worth it. And most of all, I have to prove to myself. And so I think that there's often been this weight that I felt on me. Even a few times, honestly, I could kind of physically feel a weight on my chest and my shoulders, and just feeling a lot of stress and pressure.
Yeah.
Again, mostly coming from myself and how I viewed myself,
Yeah.
that I carried. And I've gotten better at it. I think adopting practices, one of them that's helped me a lot, is just sitting outside without anything to entertain myself and just allowing myself to be, and letting go of stuff, letting my mind be empty. I don't think I'm dedicated and intent enough to be regular with meditation, but kind of the Steven version of meditation is kind of just like a mindfulness activity of feeling the sun and the wind and the leaves and trying to let go of everything. And there were moments there where I felt really at peace, and that's helped me a lot. And it's really contrasted the moments before and sometimes after, where then I pick that monster back up on my back and I try to, take on too much, or I am just too hard on myself. So that's definitely been a monster for me, is
Thank you
expectations
for
of my own
sharing
doing.
that.
Yeah.
It was, even though I didn't know what I was looking at, now that I hear you say it, I can see that as being fairly obvious when we lived together. But
Yeah.
they did have that monster, but also I wasn't aware of it at the time. At
Yeah.
least I wasn't aware that you thought of it like
Yeah, something this conversation is showing and kind of reinforcing something I've been learning recently, is just how much power there is in having such meaningful conversations like the one we're having now. And if we had been able to have more of those, a decade ago, or I guess it was 6 or 7 years ago when we lived together, whenever that was,
8.
8.
We're old.
Yep. Yeah, like I think we would have had some really encouraging and inspiring things there if we were just a little more intent about it. And it makes me want to be more intentional about having these conversations with people in my life, and that's part of why this podcast exists, and why we all can connect with the idea of fighting monsters, because we all have a story. Yeah.
I hope it works, and I actually am eager to see some more podcasts come out. Other people who have, as one high school teacher when I was 14 had me write an essay about that. He gave me an A+ on, so I was really happy. About dealing with baths of hell.
Baths of hell.
people go through these baths of hell where something really bad happens to them, and they come through it or drown in it. That this was very much in the 90s. That makes you stronger, and I don't necessarily believe that's true, but it does change you. And I really look forward to seeing more of these fantastic conversations that you have with other people who have gone through or are still going through those kinds of situations.
Yeah, that's right. Me too. I think when I was younger, I thought that a really strong person was someone who just was able to avoid all the challenges in their life. And I think now I'm becoming to realize that strength is not measured by escaping difficult tasks, it's how you just endure through the hard things. And if it's not overwhelming and seemingly impossible, then maybe it's not as hard as we think it is. So sometimes we have to face monsters that are too hard for us to really learn who we are and to grow. And yeah. So,
and all too many people, I feel like, face those monsters and they feel like they can't and they give up. And I don't want to put any castigation on them for that, especially because among my population, among TBI survivors, suicide is a very common thing. Alarmingly. But I think we all just need to learn to be kind to one another, trust one another, build on each other, because that's the only thing that ever really has helped us through it.
That's right. That's absolutely right. I think it's true that we can defeat any monster as long as we don't give up. That's really what fighting a monster and overcoming it looks like, is just enduring and being stronger than the monster through perseverance. So Austin, thank you so much. Congratulations on the PhD, the finishing the dissertation in a very, very long road, but well deserved. And I'm encouraged to see what your research and all your work does in the future. And I look forward to talking again sometime soon.
Thank you very much, and best of luck on this podcast. It's a really inspiring and intriguing idea, and I would love to see what comes from it.
Fight Monsters is a non-profit public advocacy organization that promotes the awareness of bullying in all forms.
Conditioned to make your mental beat like a drum with a beat to the heart and a beat to the chest, and you can't take no more. I fight against bullying in all forms, all forms, all forms. Fight monsters, fight monsters. You're listening to the Fight Monsters Podcast.